None of the Gospels except Luke give us an incident in the youth of Jesus. Matthew surely has the infancy narrative, and Luke has his infancy narrative. But Luke is the only one who tells us that when Jesus was 12 years old, his mother found herself in the temple with her son. Besides this incident, the first incident in the life of the adult Jesus in the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke is the baptism of Jesus. The baptism of Jesus is really a foundational event. It is a historical event, and that is why the evangelists feel the need to write about it, all three of them, though they would rather avoid it if they could. While Mark chapter 1, verses 9 to 11 states unambiguously that Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 3, verses 13 to 17, as soon as Jesus comes to John, John raises objections by saying, "I should be baptized by you, and yet you come to me." It is only after Jesus allows him does John the Baptist baptize Jesus. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 3, verses 21 and 22, we are not really told who baptized Jesus, except that Jesus was baptized. Because Luke's Gospel reads, "And when the people had been baptized, and when Jesus had also been baptized." Who baptized Jesus in Luke is not very clear, is not known. So as you go from Mark through Matthew and to Luke, you can see very clearly that the evangelists, if they had a choice, would rather not write about this event. Why then does Matthew and Luke write about this event even though they would rather not write about it? And the reason is, first, that the event was historical. It happened in the life of Jesus. And second, that it was a foundational experience, an experience, you might say, from which Jesus took flight into his mission. What makes me say that this was a foundational experience in the life of Jesus? I would like you to look at Mark chapter 1, verses 9 to 11, and let us try to understand it from that perspective. So Jesus comes from Nazareth in Galilee. He is baptized by John in the Jordan. And as he comes up out of the water, there are three events which take place. And these three events are narrated by all the three synoptics. The first is that the heavens are torn open. The heavens are rent open. What does this mean? The Jews had a three-tier understanding of the universe. The heavens above, the earth in the center, and below the earth is Gehenna or hell. God dwells in the heavens with his angels. Human beings dwell on earth. And Satan dwells in hell with his minions. So when the evangelists say that the heavens were rent open, what they mean is that communication is re-established now between human beings and God. Communication which was at a sort of standstill after the sin of the first Adam is now renewed because of the second Adam, Jesus Christ. So God communicates once again in a very clear way with human beings. The second event is that the Holy Spirit comes down as a dove. The Holy Spirit coming down is an approval of this event. God approves the event of the baptism of his Son. And the third, the climax and possibly the most crucial, is the voice from heaven speaks. And even though Mark does not explicitly state that it is the voice of God, we know that it is the voice of God because God alone dwells in the heavens. And the voice issues an invitation. I repeat, the voice issues an invitation. And the reason why I repeat it is because with our God, there is no force. There is no coercion. There's no pressure. There is only an invitation which I am free to accept or to reject. And the voice issues an invitation through these words. You are my beloved Son. In you I am well pleased. Or, in you my soul delights. You are my beloved Son. In you my soul delights. What is this invitation all about? You are my beloved Son is from the second Psalm, Psalm 2, verse 7. In you my soul delights, or in you I am well pleased, is from Isaiah 42 verse 1. So the voice is issuing an invitation to Jesus through two Old Testament texts, Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42. What is the background of Psalm 2? Psalm 2 is a coronation psalm, a psalm which was sung when the king was ascending the throne. So it has to do with glory, it has to do with kingship, it has to do with son and daughtership, it has to do with the crown of gold. What is Isaiah 42? Isaiah 42 is the first song of the suffering servant. See my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. So it has to do with suffering and pain. It has to do with ignominy. It has to do with a crown, but a crown of thorns. So one might say that the invitation issued to Jesus through the voice from heaven is to be king and to be servant, is to be son and to be slave, is to have a crown of gold and a crown of thorns. And my interpretation of the voice from heaven is this: that the voice from heaven invites Jesus to be king who becomes king by being servant. And I go even further. The voice invites Jesus to be king who becomes king only by being servant. In other words, if Jesus accepts the invitation, there is no other way. If Jesus accepts the invitation, he has to follow this path. If Jesus accepts the invitation, glory can only be through the cross. And that is why in all the synoptics, immediately after Jesus receives and hears this invitation, he is led by the Spirit into the desert. He is led by the Spirit to be tempted. So the temptations, whether in Mark chapter 1, verses 12 to 13, or in Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 to 11, or in Luke chapter 4, verses 1 to 13, are all about whether Jesus will accept the invitation or whether they will reject the invitation. Mark's gospel does not have the three temptations. Matthew and Luke have the temptations of stones into bread, of jumping down from the pinnacle of the temple, and of being given the kingdoms and the power and the glory. In all of these, the point is very clearly that Jesus do not accept the road of pain, that Jesus not accept the road of the cross, that Jesus opt instead for glory alone and not glory through the cross. When I look at my own life as a Christian, as a disciple of Jesus, I am aware that in my own life there is a combination, you might say, of cross and crown, of pain and glory. And there are times when the pain becomes so much, when the cross becomes so heavy to bear, that I wonder whether it is worth carrying the cross. There are times when the challenges of life, whether it is a husband or a wife who is dependent on alcohol, whether it is a son or daughter who is dependent on drugs, whether it is a son or daughter who has failed an examination and has been unemployed now for the last 4 or 5 years, whether it is a neighbor who's getting on your nerves, whose sight you cannot stand, whether it is a property dispute or a dispute of another kind. These are practical challenges of life and practical crosses which sometimes become difficult to bear. And we begin to ask ourselves, is it really God's will that I carry this cross? And if it is God's will, then how do I go about carrying this cross? The temptation, like in the case of Jesus, will be to opt for the easy way out. The temptation, like in the case of Jesus, will be to opt only for glory if I can. And yet we know that Jesus overcame these temptations. We know that even though his prayer in Gethsemane was, "Father, take this cup away from me," he never forgot to add, "Not my will, but yours be done." And so as I reflect on my own baptism And when I say baptism, I do not mean that event when you were a child, because you might possibly not remember that event at all. But my own baptism means my awareness of my call as a disciple of the Lord. When I remember that, I also remember the invitation issued to me by the Lord, namely, that my glory will come through the cross, that there will be pain, but that I will overcome. And before me is the example of the Lord himself, who walks ahead of me, who never leaves my side. As we continue our journey to the Lord, let us keep that focus and our gaze on him, so that when the cross becomes heavy to bear, he will give us the strength to keep carrying it courageously.